Okay, well, I'll make a start, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the final webinar of the year, which is really a summary of progress and discussion of plans going forward with the different ADNeT initiatives, which we'll talk about. So a recording of this webinar, and indeed all the webinars in the series so far, can be found on our YouTube channel. So if you're not aware of them, please check them out. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. The Australian Dementia Network acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, their cultures, and to their elders past, present and emerging. Normally at this stage, I would talk more about ADNeT and what it actually is. I don't particularly need to do it for this presentation because we're going to be hearing in detail from the memory, from the different leads and the managers of the different three initiatives. So I won't talk about it in any detail, but just to say there are those three arms or initiatives: the registry, the memory clinics and the trials, and then underpinning that there's also ADNeT Tech and ADNeT Business. So Stephanie's going to be talking in more detail about the ADNeT registry, but this is just an early plug, and I'm sure she'll be talking about it some more. That if you're not already and you are interested in talking about in participating in the registry, and she'll talk about some of the benefits of that, please can you email the number of the address on the screen now, and you can see a map of their progress to date, including 34 participating sites and many sites across 4 states coming soon. And then we've got a online memory clinic map, which you can see there. So that services across the country, both formal memory clinics and other services involved in specialist assessment of cognitive decline. So again, if you'd like your services to be listed, which is a valuable resource for specialist GP and other stakeholders, please contact us. So today we've got 3 fantastic speakers. It's very exciting. Firstly, Stephanie Ward, who is a staff specialist in geriatric medicine at the Prince of Wales Hospital here in Sydney. She's also a senior research fellow at the Centre for Healthy Brain Ageing at the University of New South Wales. Her research interests are in the prevention of dementia, especially in the quality of care for people living with dementia. She's the clinical lead for the ADNeT Clinical Quality Registry, as well as a co-investigator on the Intergeneration Integration Initiative that is establishing and evaluating intergenerational preschools that involve community dwelling older adults. She's also an investigator on a number of clinical trials funded by the NHMRC, investigating interventions to reduce dementia risk. And then we'll have Inga speaking. Dr. Inga Mehrani is the project manager for the Australian Dementia Network Memory Clinics Initiative. She's a trained speech pathologist and therefore developed a keen research interest in the improvement of diagnosis and treatment for individuals with stroke-induced and neurodegenerative language impairments. In 2018, she completed her PhD in cognitive science as part of the International Doctorate for Experimental Approaches to Language and Brain at Macquarie and the University of, and my apologies to any Dutch speakers, Groningen. Her most recent research focuses on speech planning process, i.e. conceptualization and possible conceptualization deficits in speakers with stroke-induced and primary progressive aphasia. And finally, to Professor Chris Rowe. He's a nuclear medicine physician and neurologist with over 20 years of experience in dementia research and patient care. He's the Director of Molecular Imaging Research at Austin Health Melbourne, the Professorial Fellow, University of Melbourne, an NHMRC Practitioner Fellow, and is the inaugural Director of ADNeT. His research focus is molecular imaging of neurodegenerative diseases, particularly Alzheimer's disease. He has over 300 publications and is in the 2020 highly cited researcher list of the top 1% worldwide for neuroscience, with over 4,500 citations of his papers per year. So I'll be coming back at the end to talk a bit more about plans moving forward. But Stephanie, you're the first presenter, so I'll hand it over to you now. I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Matt, to give an update on the ADNeT registry. I've spoken about this at one of these webinars before. So I just wanted to acknowledge our funders, our amazing steering committee members. Some I think might be on the call today. Our ADNeT investigators, including Chris Rowe, who will talk later, the incredible ADNeT registry project team under the leadership of Casey Wallace, the people living with dementia and their care partners who've really helped us a lot with shaping this registry, and the clinicians from the participating sites who also have helped a lot in terms of the way the registry looks and continue to input and bear with us. So we're grateful for everyone's input to date. And just a reminder that clinical quality registries are based on the systematic collection of data within defined clinical domains, so for particular conditions, which primarily looks at data that informs on the quality of clinical care that is being given, on the appropriateness and effectiveness of care. So what are we actually doing, and what are the outcomes of the care that we're giving? Clinical quality registries are really useful in that they can benchmark clinical practice and highlight variations between different services, and that really helps to then drive improvements, because us clinicians really benefit from understanding what someone else is doing in a different service and understanding how our patients are different and what improvements can be made. Clinical quality registries, they're a really great tool for practice improvement, but they're also a great tool in terms of collection of data to help further research efforts, and can also be a really efficient way of identifying people, efficient way of connecting people to suitable research opportunities when they arise. So registries work by having clinicians enter a brief data set on people that meet eligibility criteria. And for our registry, it's when people have been made a diagnosis of either mild cognitive impairment or dementia. That data is securely transferred into the registry database. It's analysed, and then further outcomes are collected by the registry from people themselves and their carers, their caregivers, on patient and carer reported experience and outcome measures. And then later from follow-up data from clinicians and follow-up data from data linkage. And when we think about what are we going to measure with a registry, those processes of care are things like, did we assess cognition? Did we do appropriate neuroimaging? Did we provide information? Did we use judicious use of medications? Have we made appropriate referrals to support services? If we think about the outcomes that are relevant in respect of dementia and mild cognitive impairment, it's things like people's cognitive function, daily function, neuropsychiatric symptoms, comorbidities like falls, unintended hospitalizations, entry into aged care facilities, survival time, and also important things like quality of life, social health, and the well-being of caregivers. The registries form part of the quality improvement cycle. The clinicians enter data, they can access that data to then look at opportunities for improvement and then deliver better care. And registries have been shown to be cost effective and drive improvements in other conditions and do exist for dementia internationally. And registries are also really great for connecting people to suitable clinical trials if people are interested, for post-market surveillance of any new medication that comes onto the market in terms of longer-term safety. They can facilitate research and provide, once they get big enough, assist in providing epidemiological data. So why get involved in the clinical quality registry in dementia? What benefits does it give you as a clinician? It's helpful for your service planning. It's great to be able to audit your own clinical practice, and the best way of doing that is benchmarking, is comparing to other sites. The data that you collect for the registry can be used for local research projects into local needs. Participating in the clinical quality registry as a physician is useful for continuous practice, continuous professional development as a requirement of our CME. It also can help us prompt clinical care as well. Some people will say, oh, when I fill out the registry, I remember I need to ask this or this. And we are hoping our registry will really open up research opportunities for patients. What are the downsides? Well, it does involve a bit of extra time for data entry, and you need to integrate the registry operation into your workflow, and sometimes integrate that with local IT processes. And there's a requirement for governance approvals if it's being conducted in a public hospital, but our team helps with that. So our vision for the ADNeT registry is to one day be able to incorporate all diagnostic and settings and services for dementia in Australia, and eventually we'd like to be able to register the entire population of people that are newly diagnosed with dementia or MCI, and in doing so systematically drive improvements in the quality of care and patient outcomes. That's very ambitious, but it has been achieved in Sweden, for example, which began with a clinical quality registry in memory clinics and then expanded to encompass primary care. So we recruit clinical sites that diagnose dementia or mild cognitive impairment. So that includes memory clinics, but also private specialists, other relevant outpatients. And in the future, we'll look at different sites like general practice and acute care. Our registry team supports the local governance. We have a wonderful ethics support provided. And we ask clinicians working in those services that at the time that they're comfortable with a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment or dementia for the patient that they've seen, they're at that point where that diagnosis is confirmed. That's when the person's details would be entered into the registry. And we ask clinicians to form an opinion about the best way for recruitment and capacity to opt out of the registry, and whether there's a person responsible, and ensuring that the diagnosis is being clearly communicated. And then we ask our clinicians, or they may defer to an alternate person within their clinical service, to enter a brief minimum data set. And that includes things like the details of the diagnosis. What's the diagnosis, the date, subtype of dementia or subtype of MCI, whether medications were prescribed, follow-up, interest in participating in research, interest in participating in ADNeT screens and trials, and some health details around mobility, function, driving, falls, as well as medications, past medical history. And it can be done directly into a REDCap, or if you're a dinosaur like me, it can be done onto a form and someone else can enter it into a REDCap later, such as an administrative staff member. Tips that our participating clinicians have given us are things like they like to do it at the time of seeing the patient, so it's faster. Some services like to enter the data in the context of a case conference and can help structure a case conference discussion. And some people like the fact that it can help you to remember things to ask. The data is entered into a secure database. The registry accesses that database and then sends out the information to the person or their caregiver, dependent upon their capacity, with information about how to opt out. And if people do not opt out within around a 4-week period, the data is then transferred into the registry database. And for people who don't have capacity and they don't have a person responsible, we can include baseline clinical data that is de-identified. We don't make contact with that person again. But if people don't opt out, we then invite the person, and if there is a carer, the carer to complete some surveys. And the surveys capture information about their experience at the diagnostic site. Was it good enough? Did they get enough information? Did they feel involved? And also a couple of questions around well-being and general health and quality of life. And we've been really, really lucky. We have been working in a small group led by Xiaoping Lin, and we've got a small group of very invested people, including consumers, who've helped us to make these questionnaires. And we've got about a 46% return rate now for these questionnaires. We look at longer term, we're going to be collecting longer term clinical data where available. We're yet to operationalize that, and also looking at administrative data for longer term outcomes. And we've been collaborating with the Registry of Older South Australians. So where we're up to, we've published our protocol, we've published our a consent model. We now have met with 74 sites across Australia, and we have now, I think it was 33 when this slide was done, but it's now 34 sites that are participating and are contributing data. And we've had 800, this is as of last week, 806 people who were identified as eligible. 646 have been recruited into the registry. 12% have elected to opt out, and the remainder are in the recruitment phase. We've had ongoing discussions with Northern Territory and Western Australia as well. And what's really new and exciting is that we're about to share our site reports with our participating sites very shortly. So each site will get a report, and it will be a summary of the data that they've entered, but also compares the data to that nationally. And I'm going to show you just an example of what's on the report. So the site is a mock site, but all of the data is correct. So you can see what percentage of people at your own site have agreed to participate and also to opt out. You can see the types of diagnoses that you are seeing in your clinic, and the green is your site. Oh, sorry, it was all sites, and the dark blue represents your site, and you can see if the patient profile you're seeing is different. We collect data on cognitive function, and again, we can compare parameters around cognitive function. I've only shown a snippet of the detail that's reported in the site report. And we also report on quality indicators. And we have 7 endorsed quality indicators, which include wait time, basic investigations that should be done as part of a workup for dementia. And also we are interested in benchmarking prescription practices around cholinesterase inhibitors. And this way you can see, your own site's performance and also how that compares nationally. And also one of the things I really like about the registry is the information we get directly from the patient or the person, and as well as their caregiver, about their overall experience. And there's a number of questions about their experiences that they've had within the clinic, because I think that's incredibly important as a clinician to understand where the opportunities are for improvement. We've had a number of papers we've produced with the Registry of Older South Australians, and one such paper, in fact, which was led by Monica Cations, has won a special award, a Paper of the Year award, which was wonderful. And so we'll be sending out our site reports to our participating sites very shortly. We'll have our first national report published in April next year. We'll be revising and finalising a baseline data set in March, given that this has been a pilot period. So there will be some adjustments made. And we'll be inviting our current participating clinicians to give input into that. And we'll then be finalising a follow-up clinical data set. And we're also currently working on some longer-term patient and carer reported measures for use in the follow-up period, which include quality of life measures. And we're hoping to have further integration of clinical record and registry data capture. So I'm going to stop there because I'm conscious of the time, and I know that at the end we'll have opportunities for questions or comments, and I'll clarify anything that I've rushed over.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was super interesting. Yeah, I'm also very grateful for the opportunity to present on behalf of the ADNeT Memory Clinics team today. And I guess we dive right into the projects of ADNeT Memory Clinics this year. So the main aims of ADNeT Memory Clinics were to build a collaborative network of clinicians and a community of practice to develop national service guidelines for memory clinic services, to develop tools and resources that are useful for clinicians as well as for memory clinic clients, to work towards an improved access to treatment and specialist assessments, and to develop training material for clinicians. So we achieved a few of these things this far, and I'm going to tell you more about the details now. As far as the collaborative network goes, we were of course hoping to have more collaboration, network meetings, face-to-face meetings with clinics across Australia. Due to known circumstances, that wasn't possible, but we are super grateful for all the clinics that have registered with us this far. So as Matt mentioned earlier as well, we established this map of memory clinic assessment services. We have more than 138 clinics registered with us to date. Those are 82 multidisciplinary memory clinics and also 60 private services, mostly metropolitan services at the moment. The map can be accessed through the ADNeT Memory Clinics website on the normal ADNeT website. And at the moment, we're not confident that this is a very comprehensive map. So we're still looking for clinics to register with us and scoping the landscape to really build this map and make it useful for primary healthcare clinicians who would like to refer clients on to specialist assessments. So this is also where the future plan for this clinic locator lies. For next year, we're planning to have a broader consultation process with GPs and the PHNs to identify what would make this map more useful to the GPs and how we could promote this and make it more accessible and more useful for the GPs. So that's the plans going forward with this map. The biggest project of the year for ADNeT memory clinics was the development of the National Memory and Cognition Clinic guidelines. Those are the first service guidelines, national service guidelines for memory and cognition clinics across Australia. And I invite you all to go onto the ADNeT website and download a copy if you're not already done so. We also accompanied the guidelines with a client guide that summarizes some of the main points that were highlighted by people with lived experience in the consultation process for the guideline development. Also, this client guide can be accessed on the Memory Clinic's website. And we also have some printed copies available. Please feel free to reach out if you want one of the printed copies. The guidelines itself were developed in a broad consultation process, a Delphi process with clinical experts and lived experience experts over the past year, almost year and a half. We came up with a number of guidelines across 14 sections that include referral processes, diagnostic processes, and post-diagnostic care recommendations. We're hoping that these guidelines will close the gap between what's current practice in Australia and international guidelines practice. So to give you a few examples of the guidelines that are part of this document, the guidelines, for example, advocate for a maximum waiting time for an appointment at a memory and cognition clinic service. We know from recent surveys that the waiting times vary largely across memory clinic services, from 1 week to up to 1 year in regional clinics. So the guidelines currently advocate for a 30-day maximum for high priority cases and a 90-day maximum for routine priority cases. We discussed particularly this recommendation a very long time with the panel, and also people with lived experience acknowledge that clinics are currently struggling to provide appointments earlier than that. They also highlighted that the waiting period is a really stressful time for clients. So what they wanted to be included in the guidelines is that memory and cognition clinics try to get support for them during the wait times. This can be as easy as just providing a referral to Dementia Australia, who's very helpful and can provide support even if that person is not yet diagnosed with dementia or maybe never will be diagnosed with dementia. It's just support to reduce the anxiety of this assessment. Can also be like a professional psychological counseling, something along those lines. You see here on the guidelines example, some guidelines are highlighted with an asterisk. Those are guidelines that were particularly endorsed by people with lived experience. And you also see, for example, in 3.63, that we highlighted parts that are clinical quality indicators as identified by the clinical registry, quality registry. So you see those work in tandem, the guidelines together with the registry minimum data set as well. As far as post-diagnostic care is concerned, that was another very big and hot debated topic in the Delphi process. We know that memory and cognition clinics are currently often not able to, or not funded to provide detailed post-diagnostic support. So the guidelines advocate for a minimum of establishing referral networks and really making sure that the care plan can be implemented well. And we included some recommendations that go over and above this basic goal, basically. What are our future plans for the guidelines? When you look through the document, you will notice that we not currently have a section that targets recommendations to clients with diverse needs. We had a very broad consultation process with over 100 clinicians and about that many people with lived experience, but we really tried to reach out in the broad community, which resulted in a relatively low representation of clients with diverse needs. So we didn't feel comfortable to go forward with those recommendations and start a very focus group consultation process to develop very specific guidelines for clients with diverse needs. And the other big project is that we want to start a monitoring and quality improvement pilot program next year. This basically means it's a self-evaluation process for memory clinics to go through the guidelines and check their current practices against the guidelines and see how they're doing, where the enablers for opportunities for improvements are, and where barriers for improvements are. And this is the really interesting data for us that we also need to then go out and discuss with government or other institutes to see how can we help clinics in the future to raise their services and to get better access for clients and improve these services. I copied here a few pictures of what the data entry process currently looks like, but this is all still very much in development. But still, we will start an expression of interest soon and would be very grateful for any clinic that would be interested to start this journey with us and would be interested to evaluate their service against the guidelines, see how they're doing just as an internal process and help us build this program. That would be fantastic. Another thing that you're very well aware of when you're attending this webinar is that we started a peer support series consisting of webinars and virtual grand rounds. So we had a series of webinars this year and we're very grateful for the huge interest that we received. We on average have about 200 registrations and historically about 50% attendance rates, which is fantastic. Similarly for the virtual grand rounds, which are case conferences that we just started a few months ago with clinicians presenting interesting cases from their daily practice, an engaging conversation with other clinicians where we invite every clinician to take part and riddle about the diagnoses that are presented in the cases. We are looking for presenters in the next year for both the webinars as well as the virtual grand rounds. So please reach out to us if you are interested in particular topics where we might that you might be interested in, or if you would like to come forward and present an interesting case from your clinical practice. We would be very grateful for that. One of the resources for clinicians that we're currently developing and that will be launched in February next year is the neuropsychology norming tool. So this is an automated tool that helps neuropsychologists to compare their data to the norm data and get a very quick analysis of their neuropsychology assessment results and results report in the end. We completed a pilot phase here with a few neuropsychologists and are currently working in the feedback and implementing everything in the programming. We kindly thank Syro for their support in programming and developing this tool together with us. We obtained the norm data from Pearson for some of the tests that are included in this norming tool. And very much looking forward to the launch and to giving it out to neuropsychologists across Australia. Another big project that started this year within the ADNeT Memory Clinics initiative and in collaboration with the ADNeT Screening and Trials initiative is the blood-based biomarkers project. This project really is about evaluating the impact on clinician management, patient health behaviors and patient well-being on assessing blood-based biomarkers in clinical practice. So really a pilot trial to see how feasible is blood-based biomarkers assessment for clinical practice in memory clinic settings. There are two big grants, and maybe Chris will talk about this more in a little bit, that have been granted on the blood-based biomarkers project, and our trials feeds into this. We've recently received feedback from the ethics committee and are frantically working on our feedback to these and hope to start the recruitment for this trial early next year. We have additional projects and collaborations, for example, with the Australian Institute for Health and Welfare and Dementia Australia, where we're trying to tackle some of the dementia data gaps in the country. For example, we're currently developing a project proposal around a consumer survey that aims to obtain data on the diagnostic pathways and the timeliness of diagnosis, as well as the associated costs and barriers to a timely diagnosis. So we hope that this will really be a good benchmarking data to understand the individual diagnostic pathways in the community. We further have a collaboration with neuropsychologists from Sydney Uni, from UNSW and University of Wollongong and the University of Melbourne. That is a work group around cognitive intervention, where we aim to set up a toolkit for neuropsychologists as well as occupational therapists, to learn about different types of cognitive interventions that can be implemented in clinical practice, and to support them into really implementing this into clinical practice. We also have a dementia atlas, the dementia service mapping project, together with the University of Canberra, that we're currently developing. University of Canberra has a long history, and the group around Luis Salvador Carrillo and Nasser Bagheri have a long history of service mapping, and we hope to take part in this and also improve on the map that I showed you earlier and get a very thorough dementia health service mapping for Australia. Just in the last minute, I would like to thank the team, the ADNeT Memory Clinics team. Some of them are online today. Thank you very much for all the work in the year, and I'd like to thank all of you for your attention and participation in all our projects over the past year.
So I'm giving an update on the ADNeT screening and trials. So we have screening sites established in Melbourne, Perth, Brisbane, Sydney, Newcastle and Adelaide. So this gives us pretty wide Australia-wide coverage. And at each of these sites, participants can be put through neuropsychological assessment, have an amyloid PET brain scan with NAV4694. And some sites can get tau PET imaging with MK6240, undergo 3T MRI brain scans and have blood taking for ApoE4 genotyping, and also blood for collection and storage for future research projects. And at a few sites, cerebrospinal fluid can be obtained too if the participants are agreeable. Under this program, all the results and trial recommendations are fed back to the participants and their referring doctor. So this the incentive for referrals into the ADNeT screening program from clinicians is the extra diagnostic information they get. So their patients get an absolute gold standard diagnostic workup. To the patients, it gives them a bit of hope, the opportunity to participate in clinical trials, and that can relieve a bit of the stress of being given a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, for example. You think that there's trials available that may be helpful to you. So there are the sites where we produce the traces used by ADNeT. So Sir Charles Gardner Hospital, SAMRI in Adelaide, Austin Health Melbourne, Liverpool Hospital Sydney's on the very verge of delivering tracer, but not quite there yet. And Royal Brisbane Hospital is supplying. So at the moment there are some supply issues because of COVID delays, etc. So Royal Brisbane supplying down into Newcastle and Sydney, and we're supplying into Adelaide and Sydney. Next slide. Just to show you an amyloid PET scan on the left and a tau PET scan on the right in lovely, vivid, living colour. And these are the sorts of results you get with sort of imaging, showing diffuse amyloid plaques on the left, particularly in the posterior cingulate precuneus and frontal parts of the brain. And on the right, you can see the tau imaging, where the tau is traditionally, it was most concentrated usually in the temporal lobes and posterior cingulate and precuneus. Next slide. So these are the contact details for our ADNeT screening centres. If you need to talk to somebody in your local area about ADNeT screening, if you need to chase up results or whatever, this slide should be available on the recording of this meeting. So we've got Lucy McIntosh in Melbourne, Reith Thoter in Macquarie, Renata in University of Newcastle, Mark and Kevin in Perth, Mia in South Australia, and Elizabeth Arnold up at Royal Brisbane Hospital. Next slide. So this is how referrals are made. We have a referral form, which is pretty minimal, has the eligibility criteria for the MCI or mild cognitive impairment, mild AD type participants that we're particularly looking for. There's an age range of 50 to 85. They have to be fluent in English, in other words, capable of doing neuropsychology testing, mini mental state score of 20 or higher, no serious unstable comorbid conditions. So fill in the form, tick the boxes, mail it through to us, and then we chase up with the patient and do an initial phone screen to make sure they meet criteria, then some on-site screening to confirm they have got objective cognitive problems. Then they'll go through the scanning, both the PET and the MRI, and a full cognitive assessment. They'll have blood taken, 80 mils, and put into liquid nitrogen storage for future research and current research projects. And at the end of all this, they have a feedback meeting with an experienced memory disorders clinician. The results are explained to the patient. They're also sent out to the referring doctor, and available clinical trials are discussed with the participants. And if they choose to go into one, then their details, a summary letter is sent to that trial site, who then follows up and recruits the patient. Next slide. More recently, we've been screening cognitively normal persons over the age of 55, because we've been recruiting for an anti-amyloid therapy study in what's called preclinical Alzheimer's disease. So it's looking for people with amyloid in the brain, but who are still cognitively normal, and they are to receive anti-amyloid infusions for 4 years, with the outcome being showing that this slows decline in cognitive testing, which in these people with positive amyloid scans is detectable on detailed neuropsychological assessment. It's a big international study. It was set up by a group with funding from the NIH, but it's involved a major pharmaceutical company called Eisai, who are providing the anti-amyloid antibody. And it's a very effective anti-amyloid antibody. It's known to reduce amyloid in the brain by over 70%. In some cases, in many cases, it actually takes amyloid brain levels back down to normal. So we set up a volunteer portal for persons interested in participating in research. I did a lot of publicity, but it was Melbourne-based. So we have now over 2,500 people in this volunteer portal. Most of them are still Melbourne-based. We need to get on and do more promotion through media in the other states. So we collect contact and medical details on the website and in the existing diagnoses, and in selected patients, we're mailing out a saliva test kit for ApoE4 testing. They meet some basic inclusions, so between 55 and 65, they have to be ApoE4 carrier or have a very high risk subjective memory complaint profile or a first degree family history of Alzheimer's disease onset under the age of 75. They'll go in then for the full battery of testing with the PET and the blood collections and the cognitive MRI and optional CSF, and then referred on to the trial sites if they meet criteria. Next slide. So these are the questions. There's various, it only takes 5 minutes to fill this in. Are you concerned about your memory? Are others concerned about your memory? Is your memory worse than it was 3 years ago? Trying to give us a bit of a profile of how serious the subjective memory complaints are. Have they got a diagnosis, been told they have MCI or had a diagnosis of dementia? If they've had an MMSE or MOCA, do they know the score? What's their family history? Are they capable of doing the neuropsych testing? Are they happy to have to provide a saliva sample? Are they happy to be contacted about research trials? Well, we'd hope so, otherwise they shouldn't be going into this, they shouldn't have entered into this database. Standard sort of medical criteria for going into a trial, checking for contraindications to MRI, and then asking what sort of trials they're interested in. They can tick one or more of the 4 alternatives: clinical drug trial, lifestyle intervention, observational studies online, or observational studies with direct contact. Next slide. So our target when we commenced ADNeT was to have 500 individuals fully characterised for putting into trials. We call this the trial ready cohort. We've exceeded that. We're up to 601 at the present time. We also did want to have a large database of people to tap into that we could pull in for further testing to replenish the trial ready cohort as required. Well, we've got 2,287, actually, I think it's higher than that now, cognitively normal subjects on our volunteer portal. We wanted to make sure we had 10 clinical trial delivery sites across Australia that were performing at a high level. We have assisted the creation of new clinical centres at Royal Brisbane Hospital and Hunter Hospital in Newcastle. We've expanded throughput at many established clinical trial sites in Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia and New South Wales. We're particularly building at the moment with 2 trial sites at St V's and Westmid in New South Wales. And we're working with Dementia Trials Australia and Neuroscience Trials Australia to identify and support more new trialists. New slide, next slide. We've had considerable academic and commercial funding since we got the grant. We've had about 680,000 from ESI for a phase 3 study in MCI early AD. PISA, which is an academically funded study based from Brisbane, has merged somewhat with ADNeT to get more of their genetically high risk cohort scanned and worked up. And they've put in 520,000. ESI have come back to us and are funding us up to $4 million to assist for screening for the AHEAD A345 study. This is the preclinical trial I mentioned, and we're aiming at screening 400 patients over about an 18-month period for that trial. And we've previously done screening for Biogen and AbbVie that brought in about 600,000. COVID travel restrictions overseas have reduced our opportunities to promote ADNeT screening to national pharma companies. So we would hope to have more on this list. We certainly have more contracts expecting in the very near future, and particularly one in another preclinical trial very soon. New slide, next slide. So our current NHMRC and commercial funding will boost the fully screened trial ready cohort to 500 cognitively normal persons and 1,000 patients with mild cognitive impairment, mild AD over the next 18 months. So that's over 1,500 fully characterised trial ready cohort participants from ADNeT, as well as supplying trial participants from this trial ready cohort. It also makes available to researchers 120 litres of blood stored in liquid nitrogen, 1,500 amyloid PET scans and 1,500 MRI scans, about 1,000 tau PET scans, and the corresponding cognitive and clinical data sets to go with 1,500 subjects. Next slide. A few general updates. We have been pre-screening now with the saliva ApoE4 test kits. They've been selectively deployed to boost the amyloid PET positivity rate in cognitively normal volunteers, which is only about 25%. That's worldwide, as well as what we've found in Australia when screening for preclinical cognitively normal amyloid positive people. So the ApoE4 screenings are already boosting that. We can see that it's the numbers are climbing as we incorporate more E4 people into that study. We have now received Human Research Ethics Committee approval to undertake pre-screening with a blood phospho-tau assay, and that will be commencing in early 2022. We've got an ongoing promotion of dementia clinical trials. ADNeT has implemented and sponsored a section of the clinical trial refer app. So we created a section for dementia, and we keep it up to date with all the clinical trials going on in Australia. So that's a resource for patients, GPs and specialists to find trials to refer their patients to. There's a new MBS item for FDG PET and dementia. So we've put up training videos for specialists and for educating doctors on the role of FDG PET in dementia. One will soon be put up for reading amyloid PET. As I mentioned, we're currently screening for the preclinical trial, and we're reviewing the current clinical trial site capacity nationwide and reviewing what more we can do to boost this. Next slide. And now all that data I mentioned is now available to researchers. If they go to the Australian Dementia Network.org.au website, they can put in an expression of interest for data for biological samples or for participants for trials. So they'll go to the ADNeT Management Committee, the expression of interest will, where it will be approved if it's thought to be scientifically rational and of merit. And then you can start getting access to all this data and other valuable scientific resource that we're accumulating. Next slide. One example of how we're using this, we have contributed bloods from the ADNeT screening into this evaluation of a phospho-tau blood test called P217 plus tau in collaboration with ABLE and with Janssen Development over in the United States. The results are pretty good, 85% accurate for detecting positive amyloid PET from a blood sample that's put through a machine called a Simoa. And these blood tests are really looking very good, and we're doing what we can to speed their introduction into clinical practice through the Memory Clinics networks and our collaborations with some large trials that trial funding that we were able to support by incorporating ADNeT into the applications. New slide, next slide. So that's my final report. We have added NARI, the National Aging Research Institute, and the Florey Institute to our list of partners. ADNeT is open to any institution. We're not a closed shop, and we're always pleased to hear from others who would like to have a more formal affiliation with ADNeT. Thank you.
And thank you so much, all three of you. That was great. So we'll now open it up to questions, and there is time for more questions if people want to continue submitting them through the Q&A. I may ask the first question actually, which was presumably one of the benefits or the aims of ADNeT generally was the way the three initiatives kind of can harmonize and collaborate. I just wonder, Chris, if you've got any indication on the number of people who've come through screening and trials that have come through the CQR or memory clinics.
I think the outreach to the memory clinics has stimulated interest in referring patients through to trials. It was actually one of the deficiencies of memory clinics in Australia. They weren't giving their patients the option in a lot of cases for participation in clinical trials. So I think the CQR and memory clinics outreach has stimulated that. So we're not seeing the people coming via the Memory Clinic Initiative or the CQR yet, but we are seeing a surge in referrals generally, especially interstate, where this is a relatively new, the trial screening programs are relatively new compared to Victoria.
Okay.
Can I add to that, Chris, is
Sure.
that we are trying to build that into the CQR, that ability to efficiently refer people who are interested in screens and trials as part of the CQR, and yet to operationalize that. But I think that'll be a great way of connecting people who otherwise wouldn't have those opportunities, as you said, Chris, but broadening those opportunities to a wider clinical setting.
Yeah, and I guess from our position, it's probably more raising awareness about the work of each of the initiatives and telling the clinics that there is this opportunity to refer to screening and trials and to register for the registry. So it's more promoting each other.
Okay, thank you. So an interesting first question. So about the TJ approval of aducanumab in Alzheimer's. So what is the take on the TJ approval for aducanumab in AD? If available, will it be provided through ADNeT clinical trials?
No, we don't have the money. It is going to be. It is over $60,000 per year, and the Australian dollar is not terribly strong at the moment. The encouraging thing is it's not just aducanumab, but there's 3 other anti-amyloid antibodies from Lilly, Roche, and Eisai that absolutely do clear amyloid plaques out of the brain. There's no doubt they're doing that. And they're also all showing about the same 30% slowing the rate of cognitive decline. So this is a small step, but it's an important first step of what, for treating a disease that probably will need multiple avenues of attack, but I think it is actually quite an exciting development, because at last we've got something that seems to be changing the underlying pathology. And of course, the logic is to get the anti-amyloid treatment in before you've accumulated too much tau and before you've done too much damage. Hence, all the big companies now are planning or running preclinical trials. So we've got Eisai, first cab off the rank. Roche is kicking theirs off early next year. Biogen have plans to run a preclinical trial, and so do Lilly. So I think this is an exciting area, and we'll certainly be supporting it how we can, but access and cost is going to remain quite a problem for some time. There is an application going into the PBS from Biogen in Australia to cover the cost of aducanumab. They're also making an application to the MBS to cover the cost of amyloid PET scanning and lumbar puncture to prove that you are amyloid positive and therefore appropriate to receive the therapy, provided you meet the other clinical criteria. So we won't hear the results of those until probably later next year, those applications.
Thank you. Just about actually the reporting of the amyloid PETs. I know you mentioned the training videos and things that you're rolling out. So at the moment, who reports on those? Is that done centrally at ADNeT? Or?
Yes, yeah, I do a lot of them.
Okay.
Hence my motivation for training other people. We also have a quantitative program that was developed by CSIRO in collaboration with ABLE, and CSIRO, a big partner in ADNeT. And so they all go through that quantitation program, producing a result in a unit called a centiloids, which is a 0 to 100 scale for how much amyloid you have in your brain. And that's a very reliable program.
Okay, thank you. Next question was, given the impact of COVID over the last few years, what's the duration of the NHMRC funding for ADNeT? Will the NCDC, the National Comprehensive Dementia Centre Programme, be the segue if ADNeT is time limited?
Well, that's a big question. Yes, we have applied for are applying for an extension of the grant time. We're not going to get any more money. We are putting a bit of money aside from what we're earning from industry through the trial screening program, so that we don't have to slam the door shut if when the grant comes to an end. And we are working closely with the proposal for National Comprehensive Dementia Centres to be incorporated as much as we can as the guide and management arm for research within those centres. But there will be a big publicity campaign next year. We have elections coming up, which we're very aware of. We have people with good contacts in high places in Canberra, and we've got to start certainly working towards future funding very quickly.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, I think I might wrap it up now. We're drawing time, so I'll just share my screen again. Our next webinar will be in February next year, and then as of this year, we'll be running every 2 months. So you'll be sent details in due course. As Inga mentioned earlier, and I think Joe, we've mentioned a link in the chat, but the Australian Dementia National Memory and Cognition Clinic guidelines are out now, so you can access the PDFs online. And just generally, if you're interested in taking part in many of the things that we've discussed today, the virtual grand rounds, putting your memory clinic in our network and hosting it on the interactive map search, and also taking part in the CQR and screening and trials, contact us, and all the details are available on the ADNeT website. And we'll end it there. So I'd like to thank once again our 3 speakers for a really fantastic, interesting webinar. ADNeT's been doing great work, and very much looking forward to seeing what it produces next year. So thank you, everyone.